So friends, in this video I am explaining Spiderhead, a 2022 sci-fi action film directed by Joseph Kosinski. So if you are new to my channel, then please subscribe, like and comment. Now no further delay, let's jump to the video. A man in an observation room is asked to agree to a trial of orders. He's also administered a drug, and the guy conducting the trial tells many jokes. The man begins to laugh uncontrollably at these domestic jokes. He's not indeed good to stop himself when they switch to stating cold information. All this is holding place at the Spiderhead Penitentiary and Research Institute, and the man in the complaint is Steve Abnesti. The next morning, Jeff, who's one of the convicts, is called out for a field visit. He's taken to an unknown locality with blindfolds on and also allocated the drug named N40. When he takes his blindfold off, all he can suppose about is how beautiful the sight before him is. In fact, he was held to a refinery with a lot of waste in front of him. To help him with his terms, he's given away another drug called Verbalus. When he gets to go to the fellowship, he meets Lizzie in the kitchen and tells her about the skills. That night he flashes back to the reason he's in this place. He was drinking at an affair and did out for drag with his friend before misplacing control and smashing into a tree, killing his friend in the proceeding. Jeff is called into the conformance room along with Heather. They both show no peculiar draw to each other. But once they care with N40, they begin expounding their love for each in their own sex act, while Steve and his helper Mark acted on and recorded the commerce. Steve explains that the aim of N40 is to not only bring on love within a person by and by, but to see if it can hold lasting well on a person truly after the drug is removed. Meanwhile, Jeff and Lizzie spend further time together and get near to each other. Jeff is subdued to the same love test with Sarah, this time on a double drug. Jeff is also called in to observe as Sarah and Heather are sat face to face, where he has to make a resolution. He has to take one of them to drug with Darkenflux, a drug that agitates a person roughly. Jeff doesn't take either of them to get attended because he knows what it feels like. Steve tells Jeff that he has to harvest one because it'll help him with their exploration into N40 or Lubictin. Steve attempts the same exercise with Sarah and Heather, but to no service. Mark begins to sweat about the ethical charges of these tests. It's also exposed that Steve takes drugs himself to get an idea of how the others feel. Steve is backed into a corner and tells Jeff that his high-ups contend that they pack out this trial. So he brings in Heather and gives her a drug of Darkenflux to record Jeff's answer. Reality goes wrong as Heather jostles around and she gets an overdose, causing her to lash out. She breaks the appointments in the room and kills herself. Mark and Steve attack her and Steve drops his keys in a fastness. Jeff uses this moment to read Steve's magazine, and that's when he finds out Steve really owns the pharmaceutical company and is responsible for all these ordeals. He so finds a bingo menu used to name the different medicines. Two figures don't own a gold star on them, N40 and B6. By the moment Steve comes to go into the control room, Jeff has set up everything to go in its place. Steve tries to take over up Heather's death and assures Mark that what they're going is for the benefit of society. These emotion-changing drugs are the future. Even so, then's a full breakdown. If you still own to buy it is about the ending. Steve has a talk with Jeff about what happened. He confirms that Heather cut out, but that her victim won't live in vain. He repeats his credit that these drugs will be the key to shaking future casualties. He asks him if he wants something to back him with what he's crossing around. The two of them end up on a drug of Laphadil, the drug that makes you laugh nothing matter what the situation. Steve tells him that it's impossible to enjoy a bad time on this, and also tells the story of how his dad told him he was going to summer camp and also stopped him off at a foster home and delivered him. Steve tries out a new medicine he names Fabica on Lizzie. It makes her afraid of anything that's in forehead of her, which in this case existed as a stapler. She sits with Jeff and tells him how bad it felt. They have one of their cling moments, and Jeff decides to tell her commodity he's wanted to from the get-go. When he was driving the auto from the party, not only was his friend there, but also his gal. He was asked for 2 counts of volitional manslaughter. She tells him not to be too hard on himself, and they make it to the kitchen to eat their feelings. Steve shows up and realizes that this could be his chance to bear out the trial. On a coming day, he calls Jeff to the control room and reveals that Lizzie will be worked in with Dark and Flux. Jeff doesn't agree to it, and Steve is quite frustrated. When Mark goes to replenish Jeff's drugs, Jeff asks him for the truth and convinces him to do against Steve and share what's coming there with the world. When Mark goes to replenish Jeff's drugs, Jeff asks him for the truth and convinces him to do against Steve and share what's coming there with the world. Steve tries to test one another moment, but to move Jeff, he makes Lizzie confess why she's truly in there. She held forgotten her babe inside a car during the summer for 3 hours and was charged with reckless endangerment and forced manslaughter. This doesn't change how Jeff feels about her, and that's when he uses the control to cure Steve. With Mark's help, he loaded up Steve with Dark and Flux and the other shocking drugs. He wanted to know what B6 was and uses it on Steve to discover. Steve tells him that B6 was a drug to control someone's conduct, and he was crossing to call it Obelix. But because it wasn't solving when he inquired Jeff to dose Lizzie, it wasn't ready finally. The two of them pick up into a fight, and when Steve gains back control, he drugs Lizzie. His drug is snooped up in the proceeding, and he can slightly observe it together. At that point, Mark is seen arriving with the rules, so Steve has to make a break for it. Jeff gets free of Lizzie's drugs and they try to escape the installation, but Jeff makes an advertisement on the intercom organizing the other captures to quit them, and they follow it because of the B6. Steve gets into his airplane and flies away with the staying drugs, while Jeff and Lizzie pick up into his boat and escape. Steve's mix of drugs causes him to hallucinate, and he crashes into a mountainside while Jeff and Lizzie laugh in happiness and enjoy the sun formerly again.